exciting. Well, it was the kind of occurrence of a supposedly rare butterfly species just around the corner where I was living, which I discovered when I was, I think, 25. It took quite some time. So it was always there. I never saw it. And then I focused on this as one of the species I worked for many years now, for decades actually. And that was a kind of discovery. It was in a very boring environment. It was near an airport actually. So not really what you expect as a nature conservation area, something different, but it was there. So that was a kind of, let's say, very surprising thing, yes. I think that's always true. So there are different worlds you live in. So if you're, let's say you work in genetics like you do, then of course you're mainly working in the lab. That's clear. But even I think for such cases, it would be nice to have some kind of a little walk outside just to get some new inspiration, to be some in different settings, having kind of, let's say, enjoying the air, enjoying nature, enjoying birds, whatever it is. So I think it's always important. But also in other fields, when I work on landscape ecology, for example, of course, there it's clear you should know a bit about the landscape you're working in. I mean, literally. And I do still my own field work, for example. I have one long-term study I do since 1989, which is now 34 years. Every year it's only for 2 weeks, but for those 2 weeks I'm out in the field myself, maybe have an assistant with me. And it's just important that you know what you expect from your students. So if you say, okay, maybe you can try this and that, you make one sentence as a professor, and then they work for half a year. No, that's kind of, so you have to have some idea, what does it really mean to ask people to do something? So I think it's always important to get some link to the basics, to the things you really expect from the others. And I don't want to miss my object of study. So if you sit there like on the Zoom meetings, no, it's nice, but it's kind of very abstract. So it's also very good every once in a while to just be out there in the field to see what you're researching about it actually. Yeah. I started as a field worker actually when I was a small boy. Now with 6 or 7 years I started collecting insects. And ever since I'm collecting insects or data or something like this. And I just got infected because of the area I was living in, which was a rural area in the south of Germany, in Bavaria. So I got infected from just the experience in the field. So I guess it's an important component to, let's say, get infected in a positive sense, not by COVID, but of something else, so mentally by, let's say, new ideas. And I think it's also always inspiring to let's say, have this kind of field component, but it's not always possible in all fields, of course. So I guess keeping this and doing this also in the long run is a quite important aspect, which leads to the former question you had. So it's about mental health, of course, but also leads to the question which research you are doing. So you might really get some new ideas and insights or new objects of study just by being out there. So actually, I would say as a student, you should invest some time, let's say, beyond the computer and beyond the lab, something like this. So first of all, enthusiasm is surely something important. Then let's say continuity is an important component. And let's say something like credibility. You have to believe in things which are credible. So, and that's something which is very important to, let's say, distinguish facts from fake news, this kind of things. So really, let's say, doing hard studies to see what are facts and what is fiction, facts and fiction, maybe something like this. Being, let's say, have lots of patience, it's important, and being enthusiastic. So you have to love your object, otherwise I think it doesn't work. We are running, this kind of vicious circle we are in. So it's kind of, let's say, we're always doing more and more, smaller and smaller subjects in our papers. It's kind of what I was called salami tactics, no? Very small slices of the salami, piece by piece. But it's more important to have, let's say, bigger pictures, to have, let's say, more, let's say, inclusive things. But it's, of course, a lower number of papers, but they might have much higher quality. So if somehow possible, I tend to recommend also to let's say the students who can afford, which is a difficult question, of course, to focus on quality rather than quantity. And as long as we, as let's say seniors, evaluate in this way of quantity rather than quality, I think there is no way out. So we have to really change this attitude. So I rather look at the quality of a paper. Maybe it's just 2 or 3 a year of a good scientist. That should be okay. I have many more, but it's kind of, let's say, automatic process after some time that you're included there. But there are only few which are really good. Also in my papers, I would say some are really good, and the others are kind of, let's say, well, you can't avoid doing this kind of work once in a while, put it like this, no? In this position. And of course, I try to, let's say, control certain processes if I work with colleagues on certain topics, just to bring in some, let's say, criticism, some skeptical aspects, these kind of things, just to try to teach people that it's not all about the quantity. And we have now many studies where I would say, well, I say to some of my colleagues, please don't take me as an author. I don't want to stand on this paper. It's too bad. And then people are surprised. Okay, oh. And I think it's very important to say it's not about being on many papers. It's mainly on being on, let's say, good, high quality papers. And I hope we can get this more and more also in the reality of our teaching, which is very hard. Because if you look at the evaluation of, let's say, proposals or people, if they get for positions, the first thing is you look at the age index, no? This Hirsch index. Hirsch, you know, Hirsch, there's a deer in German. The German word Hirsch is deer. It's exactly fitting. Now, how many ends do we have? This kind of thing. And I think it should be only one of the aspects, at least, that should be used. And many people would agree in the statement, but still we are quite far from, let's say, implementing this idea of not really only focusing on this one. So it's an important component, yes, but it's only one out of several components. So many of the others are much more difficult to judge, of course. Let's say your social life, your kind of, let's say, ability to work in a team. That's very hard to quantify. And it's also very hard on an application to say, okay, I'm a social person. Okay, this sounds great, no, or strange. And if you say I'm a social scientist, you might be mistaken from coming from social sciences. Of course, we are all social scientists somehow. So I think it's tricky, but we have to, let's say, move away from the quantity in direction of quality would be the kind of most important statement. So my first publication, my first listed paper, I was 40 when I got my first listed paper in Web of Science, which is normally much too late to make any career nowadays. But it was the case in my case. I was exactly 40 years old. And then, of course, if you know the index or if you know the indicators, it's also a bit somehow easy to, let's say, make use of them. So I knew I need some more, let's say, referee journal papers. Okay, so I wrote them. So after 2 years, I had 25 of them or something like this. It also shows if you really want to do this, you can do it, which tells you that the indicator is not a perfect one. So as soon as you can modify an indicator, it's no longer an indicator. That's a tricky thing. Yeah, well, it's crucial. I mean, it's crucial because, well, sometimes you might have, let's say, brilliant ideas of a single person. This still happens once in a while, no? But that's the exception which proves the rule. The rule is about, let's say, social interaction, joint development of ideas. And there are hardly any ideas out there which you can really, let's just track back to one person. It's normally something collectively which is developed or, let's say, coming into existence. Which is also sometimes strange. You read a paper done by some of your colleagues. Oh, they said, oh, that's my idea. It's not. It's just an idea which is out there in the air, and some people wrote about it, and the others have been too late. So you'd be jealous about this, of course, but it's often they have the effect, well, that's my idea. Well, I think it's more the idea of many people at the same time, because we all live in the same, let's say, setting, the same circumstances. We got the same information, let's say, tsunami, actually, more or less. And then you select the nice things out of this, and then you think it's your idea, but it's not. Laboratory is crucial because of let's say, the team who's working in the laboratories. A lab team is quite important. So you have a team which really cooperates in a very nice and open and friendly and respectful way. I think it's ideal for your own career. And the same is the opposite. Of course, people think if it's very competitive, you learn a lot for life. Yes, that's right, if you believe in all this competition kind of bullshit, so to say. But then in the end, you're always fighting on your own. You're always alone. And I think one of this from soccer, from football, you never walk alone. That's a quite important component also in science. I think it's important to have a good lab atmosphere, to have, let's say, a good relationship. There's some competition, that's okay, but it's not. It should not be the main focus to compete with your colleagues. It's rather to jointly develop ideas. I think that's quite important, yeah. First of all, I think scientists can help society if they are, let's say, open-minded enough to try to bring across their ideas and messages in a way which can be understood by society, by politics, etc., which is not trivial. So I'm doing this for many years now because I work on this IPBES and I'm also part of the German government's advisory board, all this kind of thing. So we always try to simplify things in such a way that they are still right. Of course, they're always slightly wrong, but still more or less right. and that they can be understood. And I think only a few colleagues still, let's say, dare to do this because they're just afraid to say something wrong. So if you're afraid of saying something wrong, it's not your right position. But we should learn also to be a bit more pragmatic. So we have to know what's exactly the scientific result, which you can normally not tell to normal people because they wouldn't understand. Well, genetics, well, I think you talk about genetics. Well, that's quite tricky to bring across genetics to normal people, let's say, or to policymakers. So you also have to find ways to simplify things where you know it's not exactly right, but as long as it's not horribly wrong, I think that should be okay. So I have many colleagues who say, okay, the things you're doing is great, just go ahead, it's not my business. And I think we need more people to, let's say, really dare going out there in this kind of wilderness of science policy interactions. It's also quite rewarding in the end because then you notice also how people think, what they are expecting, and also how decisions are made, which sometimes you also might not like in the way in which they are done. So you might have some impact, of course, because there are many different advisory bodies for each government, so different directions. You have the economists, you have the natural scientists, you have the social scientists. Everybody says something different. So for the policymaker, it's still difficult, but at least you should have some, let's say, convincing arguments which could help them in their decision making. So I guess it's an important component. We should do this as scientists, but not forget about the science as well, of course, in the background.